All right, and welcome back to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Dallas, and we got Mercy joining us again discussing Genesis. So thanks again, Mercy, for joining us. We get to crack open another can of worms today. So hopefully you got everything ready.
Yes, love to hear more about Adam only and the distinctions and your fleshing out of that. I've learned so much, and so it's I think a very needed video and an exciting one. So everyone wants to hear about Adam only.
Yeah, so what we're going to do then is we're going to take a look at who is the people of Adam only talking about. A lot of questions have come up, is this talking about this person, this group, these people? And what we're going to do is actually, because we've already laid out the understanding that Moses put the Torah together, it was under the Suzerain Vassal Treaty system. We've already understood that between Exodus and Deuteronomy, that's talking about the creation of Israel and their covenant time of establishment. But according to the suzerain vassal treaty system, there needed to be a prelude. They needed to know what led up to Israel being included. So there was the historical prologue, and that is Genesis. And Genesis is talking about where the covenant man began, had descendants that allowed Israel to inherit this system. So Moses is claiming that this began with Adam. So what is Adam? Who is Adam? What's the scenario that Moses is claiming? And that's what we're going to take a look at. I am hoping in this video, and I'm just going to lay this out straight, the verse by verse series that we went through, if some of this stuff comes up and you're unfamiliar with why I'm making references and why I'm saying the things I'm saying, we've gone into detail, great detail in the verse by verse series, going literally verse by verse and at times word by word to understand what these cultures were using these phrases for. So we are going to go into a little bit of it, but at the same time, I am going to ask you to do a little legwork and catch up here because the last thing we want to do is have every video repeat. So, okay, disclaimer out of the way. We're going to have some fun. We're looking at Moses has said that there was an incident taking place at the time of Adam, which required God's action to create a covenant man. So let's take a look at the story that Moses is telling us to understand uh, a little bit. This is Let me just say, if you're into covenant creation, this is the conversation we're going to have because we're going to be looking at some of this language and we're going to put together this narrative so that we can understand the importance of what's going on here. Who are these people? What are these people talking about? What's the message? And before we get into this, I know Mercy loves this topic. Both of us are. Whatever you call them, word junkies when it comes to trying to find the stream of thought throughout the whole Bible, starting in Genesis, hitting the law, going through the prophets, the boring chronicle time periods of this king and that king, and then how it culminates. So today, by focusing on Genesis, hopefully you guys also are looking at how this vein transpires all the way from Genesis all the way through to Revelation. So, Mercy, when we're coming to Genesis 1, stuff that you really do good is kind of summarizing where most people are at. We've already summarized and looked at this, but what I would rather do instead of you asking and presenting, well, what the most people looking at, why don't we do it more from this covenant creation point of view? Because that's really now what we're pushing into is how should we be interpreting Genesis? What was Moses presenting? What was the Bible presenting to the Hebrew people who were converting into the chosen people at that time? What were they being told by Moses? So we're going to begin in that story, and I'm going to ask Mercy because I'm not going to get into Genesis 1:1. Maybe if she can, I know this is the hot plate. We never even talked about this. Maybe give us a 30-second, 45-second, unfair amount of time to give us a brief. In the beginnings, God created the heaven and the earth, and how it really isn't talking about physical creation, and we need to look at it from a people presentation.
Right. So when we look at the Bible, we have to look at the cosmology of the ancient Near Eastern worldview. And the cosmology for actually all of the ancient world was what? Three layers of reality. And that was what? The sea, the earth, and the heavens. And that's why the temple is built in that kind of system. Now, within that, though, when you're talking about the beginning of Genesis, I'm going to thread it all the way back to Jesus. Jesus, what did he say when he came onto the scene? He talked about the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom. Well, now let's go back to Moses. Moses is now coming out of slavery with his people. out of the kingdom of Egypt. And he's saying, we are a kingdom. Well, how is he going to reestablish that? Well, he then now in Genesis gives a historical prologue on in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? But it's really verse 2. This was a big shocker, and it's not just you, but like many other scholars are seeing this. They just don't know what they're seeing, and that is this empty and void. What is coming out of this? It is in the midst of what? Catastrophe. It's in the midst of a tremendous what? Destruction event. When we think of, empty and void, or, formless and void, in English, we think, oh, there was nothing. No, what there was a destruction event. And we can see that through what Jeremiah 4:23, I think, says the same thing of this language, right? Of the scripture interprets scripture. So when I was delving into this, it was very shocking that, wow, there was an empire, a kingdom before. It's a massive destruction. And out of that, God is creating light. God is creating a new creation out of this. Now, that's a completely different shift of how we're understanding the beginning of Genesis. We were told in Christianity there was nothing, and all of a sudden God creates this physical world. No, when you look at it through the lens of Moses and what he's trying to establish, what's happening is that no, there was already a creation event physical, but what was happening was that God was wanting to create a creation covenant with a specific group of people. And this group of people was specifically in the land of Mesopotamia.
I like how you started that with Jesus, because we see the exact same thing taking place, and everything that starts with him, same thing. In the beginning, in the beginning. Moses, it was in the beginning of them, and that's what we see with uh, taking place with in the beginning of Adam, is in the beginning of the kingdom. And when we
Yeah.
take a look at this, especially in depth at that word Barashit, we can see how there's this extremely prejudiced idiom towards in the beginning does associate to a kingdom. So you are talking about that. We're going to look at a couple examples here in order to establish these kind of claims. But again, most of us being covenant creation, we don't have a problem with these claims. We've researched it a little bit. So that's why we're not going to linger too much. But I do think that was a great way to bring this up. We have to transition our mind from physical creation. We're not talking universal here. We're talking about a specific people. And there's a couple, just a couple of scriptures I can throw at us to, get our mind on this. Some words that we're familiar with. Uh, Isaiah 64:8. But now, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are our potter. All of us are the hands of your work. Just like in Isaiah 43:21, the people who I formed for myself. So here we have God, who's the potter of the clay, working with his hands, forming a people for himself. Isaiah 44:1-2. Hear now, O Jacob, my servant, Israel I have chosen, the Lord who made you, who formed you. That's literally God who made a people for himself by forming them from the clay, from the dust, from the earth. And Isaiah 44, 21, remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, I formed you. So God forms peoples. And this is very important for us to understand, because if the context is talking about natural creation, well, that's obviously going to be read very different than if the context is a kingdom formation. Now, covenant is used to create a covenant kingdom. So that's why that's also being established into here. So now we kind of have that little bit of introduction.
Just expand a little bit on that. Like when we understand, and we've already established this, that a covenant is a suzerain vassal treaty, right? The treaty cannot exist outside of a territorial jurisdiction. That was the whole point. You had the greater King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the suzerain, that then would come and would grab a city state, a lesser king or lord, and say, hey, do you want to be in covenant with me in the sense of a treaty so I could protect you? I could provide for you, right? This was the whole concept of a covenant. So it was always in connection to that territory. And in the Bible, we're opening it up. And oh my goodness, like you said, it's very specific to the land of Mesopotamia or the Adamah.
And that's what we're going to get into is kind of looking at who are these people groups? Are they just random? Are they everybody in the universe? Are they everybody just on the earth? Are they just in a little locale? So these things are very important because without the context, well, we can end up reading many different things into these. And unfortunately, religion wise, we read ourselves into these things. And if we do that at an inappropriate time, we're going to really come to some really bad conclusions. So we've kind of mumbled around from about 10 minutes here. Suzerain Vassal Treaty, we've kind of gone over in a while. You know, we've talked probably at least 5 videos with that. So if you're not comfortable with that, I really recommend getting into it. It's as Mercy says, it's the Rosetta Stone of the Bible. The whole Bible's written in this contract, so they have to use certain formats. So highly recommend doing that. We're looking at the creation of a people, and we're going to take a look at the narrative as Moses is claiming a big event, a reason for this event, whole without going, let's just get into it. Let's have some fun. All right. So, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. We're just going to summarize that lightly today by saying, in the beginning, God created this covenant people.
Mhm.
And the earth was without form and void. Now, this tells us a lot, as Mercy was saying, and that's common. Is the first thing that we do is we go to Jeremiah 4, and we see a picture in Jeremiah 4 of a covenant people who have become disobedient, and as a result, God is going to come and destroy them, and He's going to wipe them out. And the result of this, which would be a neighboring nation coming in to destroy them, would have been the destruction and the end of this people through war. So God was going to bring upon them this event. And after the war destruction was taking place, Jeremiah describes it as the earth was without form and void, and even gets to there was no light in the heavens. So this is giving us a very good description. And when we put this into context with what Moses is talking about in Genesis 1, we have the beginning of, and the earth was without form and void. So there was war in the land. There was destruction. There was chaos. And Moses goes on to say, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So there's a flood issue. So we see God is judging this as a bad thing. We're not looking at the perfect beginning. We're looking at a place that's being described as war, destruction. It's without form. Structures have been torn down. Cities have been decimated. It is void. There is no man in the land, no ruling power to bring order and sustain the people. And therefore, darkness was on the face of the deep because God had brought a great flood of judgment against this chaos.
Mhm.
And as a result, God then caused a wind to blow across the waters and dry this out. So it's very interesting. It's like Mercy had said, Moses begins the story of Genesis with there was war and destruction and chaos in the land. And
Mhm.
that's the beginning of the movement of God who causes a wind to blow to dry off this land.
Mhm.
All right, so anything that you'd want to throw in there, Mercy, as I'm just trying to get this idea that Moses is starting a story here. It's We're starting a story of destruction throughout this land, a torn down, devastated place. There has been a big flood language being taught. So obviously we understand these big symbols. Is there anything else you want to add in there?
Well, I just wanted to give a little more background with a background of Jeremiah. Why is Jeremiah using the same language that Moses is using? Moses, you're talking about 1446 BCE. Here comes Jeremiah. I don't think a lot of people understand the context and the setting of Jeremiah, and that is that the house of Israel has already been taken out of the land and had been taken captive by the Assyrians in 721 BCE. So now Jeremiah is here. This is not talking about Israel, but the house of Judea. So the house of the Jews are there in the land, but now it's their turn to what? Experience the same catastrophic event that Moses is also talking about in the beginning of Genesis. So there's a cycle and a repeat here, because Jeremiah, when you look at the Babylonian captivity, we had three different exile movements. So we have this actually history recorded in the Bible, where the first exile, you have Daniel. That's when Daniel is being, written post the event, of course. And that was the first. And then the second exile, you have Ezekiel. That's why Ezekiel was written. And then Jeremiah is actually going through this. And Jeremiah is writing in the terminology that Moses was familiar with, but also during that time, which would have been around post 586 BCE. So you're talking about 500 years before Christ. He's writing this. So they're very familiar with this language. We are not. If you don't know that history, and why is Jeremiah repeating that? Why is Jeremiah repeating what Moses wrote in Genesis? Because it's the same event of this destruction point and a nation coming, and oh my gosh, something new is being created. What are they creating? It's not a whole new world. No, it's they're creating a whole new covenant people, because God is starting over.
And that's the big thing, is this is coming out of the destruction of one, and he knew is coming out of that. And that's what the New Testament authors, they grab onto when they describe Jesus and his beginning. It's a new beginning. It's a new heaven and new earth. Why? Because the old heaven and the old earth were washed away in a flood. And we see that being prophesied by Daniel 9. He said, and their end will come with a flood. And we see that in the very beginning here. We see, and the earth was without form and void. The land had been laid waste, and the building structures have been torn down. It was void. There was no inhabitants left in the land, and darkness was on the face of the deep. The flood had come and done destruction. So we see that exact same thing playing out at the time of Jesus' arrival, when Rome came in and destroyed them. And we've been in the past couple of videos, I've done how when a war is a flood. So we see that similar language being depicted. Jesus saying the same thing that came upon Noah was coming upon them. And what was on Noah? A flood. And that's exactly where the deep was open and cracked out. So we can see, like, this is very familiar language, and it ties in with all those patterns. So we don't really have to guess too much, but what we have to do is we have to be willing to let the Bible's phrases and idioms remain consistent all the way through. And Jeremiah is doing that because he's part of that system, and so are the New Testament authors. So good point, Mercy. I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, so now what we're then seeing in verse 2 is the earth was without form, there's destroyed, there's no man in the land, darkness was on the face of the deep, there was a flood, destruction. So Moses is saying, in the beginning, there was war, there was destruction, there was disorder, there was chaos. And now when we see that, we now need the answer. And that's what Moses is about to present for us. As we read, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. I've already shown how that should be better translated. And God caused a wind to blow. And we see that that's why the land dries up. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mercy.
And I the new revised version actually has that, that it was the wind that was moving over the surface of the waters, and is very consistent with the context of what this ruach is saying in Hebrew. And so we actually have a translation that actually does say that. So I think that's very significant.
We also see in Genesis 8 the exact same duplication. We also see in Josephus, who rewrote the Torah for I think it's in the antiquity of the Jews, and he also pens it as, and God caused a wind to blow. So there's no doubt that, and that's why in those previous videos I highly recommend going into it, and that's why we can say here there was a destruction, there was a flood, the earth was in chaos, it was totaled. And so God caused a wind to blow over this flood waters to what? Cause the land to dry. And we see that in day 3. But before that happens, in verse 3, we see, and God said, let there be light, and there was. Well, this is in contrast to what we just read, which was darkness was on the face of the deep. So there was destruction in the land. There was chaos in the land. There was darkness. God had come in judgment of the land and determined it was in the need for light. And so God said, let there be light. And there was light. Now, this light we know is representative of the new covenant head. So we see this when Jesus arrives, he is the light of the world. Adam was the light of the world. And that's what we see here as God said, let there be light.
And didn't Jesus tell the people that he was speaking to in Matthew, you are the light of the world? Now, I know in different contexts in the Bible, the light is referred to, say, the law, or the light that, puts a lamp upon your feet to walk the way. But we always have to look at context, folks. I think this is very, very important, because in different contexts, that one word can mean very different things. So we even have Jesus saying in Matthew, you are the light of the world. It's a people group. He didn't say the Torah is the light of the world. He said you. That's very important to really soak in and be like, oh my gosh, light here is referring to what? The people.
Which we see also as this continues and says, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and he called the light day, and the darkness he called night, which is exactly what the followers of Jesus ended up calling themselves in the New Testament. They said, you were once night and in darkness, but now you are the light and walk in the day. And so we see them paralleling this. Why? Because Jesus is a new beginning. Jesus is bringing a new heaven and a new earth. Jesus is the last Adam. That's in comparison to the first Adam, who brought the first heaven and the first earth and the first kingdom people. So we see it being duplicated because this is the mind of these authors. And that's the mind we have to keep this in, is Jesus was the new light, the new covenant head, the new leader. And in fact, that's what we're seeing in verse 3 is God said, let there be a light. And there was a light. And why? Well, it was void. There was no man in the land, according to Genesis 2:7-4. There was no one to rule. There was no one to do this. So God said, let there be a light in the land. And God saw the light was good and divided it. And that was the end of the first day. So the first day describes war. There's destruction. There's chaos in the land. There was floods. There was this constant to and fro, tossing back and forth with no hope. They were all lost in darkness. So God said, let there be a light amidst all of this. And God divided that light from the rest of those people.
Mhm.
And so that's where we're picking up on day one, is that area, that land was in chaos. Those people were at war. Those were the people of Mesopotamia.
Mm.
And they were now, we're going to have a little fun here because this is the transition period of history archaeologically as well, going from the Neolithic into the Bronze Age when all the new city states technologically were starting to pop up and literally cause war throughout the whole land. And this is historically what ended up happening was at the same time that we witness Adam telling, Moses' story of Adam, just as Babylon's story about Eridu. When we take a look at these stories, they're talking about a time period. Adam, he was a tiller of the ground, a tiller of the worker of the soil. That's making reference to the fact that they had transitioned into a sedentary culture and had become agriculturally based. Then his son was a shepherd. Well, that's animal domestication. That was the next big transition period, going from the Neolithic into city states. And that's what Adam was. He's this transition. Moses is saying, there was a time period when all these cities, these new city states were popping up, tribes and villages, and they were at war. They were battling with one another, and it was chaos in the land. So God said, let there be a light to come and rule over all these people. And that's what we're seeing in day one. Was there be anything else that you kind of wanted to add in there?
Um, no, but what you said is just huge. It's, it's really something.
Okay.
And the connections that you have made, I think,
You just cut out for 1 second. You just cut out for 1 second. If you mind, what am I repeating that?
right. So, I think in Christianity and taught traditionally, in Sunday school and church and everything, is that we see all of these stories in the Bible and they're not even connected to each other. And they're just like scattered here and there. And so when I really came to your channel and started to really listen to what you were, what you were observing in the Bible. Uh, I was really amazed at the fluidity and the consistency of how you were bringing all the scriptures in alignment. That was just really beautiful. And before I even contacted you, I had watched most of your videos myself because I just wanted to figure out like where you were coming from. And I think that's really important when people are engaging with us and talking about this topic. I really do encourage your audience to really do the work, to do that study, so that you can better educate yourself and how to have this kind of conversation. And we're very accessible and open to have that talk with you. So I had to do all that homework before I even bothered to even contact you, because why would I if I don't even know, what's happening there? And what I saw was a very consistent thread of all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And like, oh my gosh, Jesus did say that, but I never connected to Genesis, right? We just severed that totally off on its like own thing. But really, all of the language that I'm seeing now in the New Testament, it's always going back to Genesis. And this is really mind blowing if people can actually understand that and how much it is. And you've done so many videos where you're connecting each scripture to this context of Genesis, and it's all right there, all right there. And so I just wanted to say that to the audience, because yes, you are threading these similar word phrases that's being used over and over. The duplication, the pattern, it's there. We just haven't connected it to see that it is with Genesis.
Yeah, it's really, really thick. Like we can even take just the Gospel of John, and the first five verses are duplicating Genesis 1 through 5. Like he literally copied the contract format in order to establish the history verification for Jesus's suzerain vassal treaty.
Now,
So
I
yeah, it's
wonder that other scholars have noted that. So when I was studying the Gospel of John, there were many scholars who said that they don't know why. This is a big gap that I see. They do recognize it. They even say it. It's not just you, Dallas. They all say it. But then at the end of their commentary, you're reading. Okay, like, okay, so tell us what this means. It's like, so that's what it is. There's no connection to the application and why is it there? And so you give that answer. So I love it.
cool. So then let's keep going on this, because I think what we are seeing, because the New Testament authors, they go out of their way to duplicate this, and there's a really good reason why. Because they're watching it duplicate in front of their eyes with a new light named Jesus. So why would you change the way it was already written? That would actually be sacrilegious. And so it's very important that we hold this together. There's a reason why Revelation 20 ends on Genesis 1. There's a reason why. So good point. So let's keep going here. Let's take a quick look into the narrative. So we got the narrative of day one. It was a place of chaos, destruction, disorder. God's taking care of that by bringing order. How? By bringing a light to the world. And in day two, we read, where are we looking at here? Verse 6.
Yep.
And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters from which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Now, what I've determined by going through day two, the firmament here is talking about the temple. And this is what divides the covenant people from the other people, is God's presence among them in the temple. Well, now, if God's among you, if he's present among you and he's in the heavens, he's the firmament, well, then you are elevated up to where he is. And that's why we see this body of water being raised up. We are familiar with the waters being referred to as peoples, nations, and groups of tribes. And we see that that's what's talking about in day one, right? The land was at war. Well, there wasn't trees rising up against rocks. There wasn't great war in the land because fish were taking on bears and saying, enough of you eating us. No, it was human versus human. and those systems of identification remain consistent, which then the flood came to remove peoples. And there was two groups of peoples. There was the people that were in the darkness,
Mm.
and then there was the new people who God called out from those people and made them light. So there was the original group of people, and out of that group of people came this light person, and this light person was given a temple and was raised in authority above all those other people. He was the light above the darkness. So
Sure.
go ahead.
I just wanted to share this story, and this is like ancient thinking, the cosmology. I remember my father. My father was a pastor and a missionary. I'm a missionary kid and a pastor's kid, and I remember him saying this phrase all the time. And he would be talking about someone, something, something, and he would say, "What do they think they fell out of the heavens and the sky all by themselves?" And like as I was like learning this, like that memory that I had of my father, because he said it a lot, I'm like, oh my gosh, what was my father saying? Yes, it was a Korean idiom. We all knew it in our home. We knew it in the church when he would say that. What is he saying? He's saying, who does this guy think he is? Does he think that he fell from the heaven? Meaning, does he think he's God? He's got all authority? That's what he was referring to. So when we're looking in this context here of this heaven and this temple, this is the cosmology of what they're thinking. When we're talking about heaven for these people, they're talking about not necessarily like the temple, right, and the sky or heavens up above. They're actually talking more, it's more specific in who who is giving them this authority to establish this kingdom or empire. Well, who's higher than the king? Well, maybe the priest. Who's higher than the priest? Well, maybe God. So then the highest point that you can go would be the temple system or heaven from above. This is just language and how they would describe and talk about authority, because authority is very abstract, but you're talking with a Hebrew language that's very concrete. So they'll use a concrete symbol of the heavens, but it's an abstraction, an abstract thinking of authority. How do you put authority in an hieroglyph? You have a temple, or you have a king, a king's crown. That's the authority, or the scepter. That's the authority. This is how the language is working out. So once we understand a little bit of that, it's very easy to understand what the Bible is saying.
Well, if we take that and we just go with it, we can actually see on day 6 now. Let's see here. We go into verse 26, we actually see the fulfillment of this in a more natural description. So it's much more symbolic in day 1, 2, and 3, where when we get to day 6, what do we find? We find, let us make man in our image. Well, we start seeing, okay, man, well, this is Adam. That's the word Adam right there in the Hebrew, which then we take all the way back to the light. That was the new light in the land. And that's the new man that fulfilled the void where there was no man in the land. So here we're getting God said, let there be a light, let there be a new man in the land to bring order to this chaos. And how's he going to do that? Well, in verse 26, we see, let us make man in our image after our likeness. How? By letting them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth and everything that creeps upon it. Well, when we go back to day 2, what does it say? It says, um, and let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from which were above. Well, who was above? Adam was above. He was given what? Well, verse 26, dominion over, above. Adam was given the authority to rule over the earth, the rets, the land
Of men.
of Mesopotamia. So here we have a short story Now, let's just quickly throw in day 3 here, because this is where the regeneration comes in, is day 3. And what do we see? And God said, let the waters, verse 9, and let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place. Well, this is because God caused a wind to blow. So God caused a wind to blow, and it started moving the waters. We see this in Genesis 8. God caused a wind to blow, and the waters on the earth would dry to the point where dry land appeared. Well, that's what we keep reading here in verse uh, 9. It says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. This was the Eretz. This is the earth. So God said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How? The earth was already there. It was just filled with chaos and violence and destruction. So God sent a man of light to rule over them and restore order. How? By raising him above all the people of the land and giving him God given authority and dominion to subdue them. Where? Well, let's go down to verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the land of Mesopotamia, and subdue the land of Mesopotamia, and have dominion over all that's in the land of Mesopotamia. So, what do we see happening? What is Moses trying to tell his Hebrew audience? That there was a time period when all of Mesopotamia was in chaos, which caused destruction and war through the whole land of Mesopotamia. So God, in his great love for the people he created in the land of Mesopotamia, gathered together from the people one of the people and gave him authority through covenant to rule and reign over the whole land in order to return it to order. Why? Because of God's great love for the Mesopotamian people, that he would give them a head to lead them into peace and safety.
Hmm.
So that's what Moses was claiming. He was claiming Adam was God's answer to the chaos of an uncovenanted transition point between the Neoliths and the Bronze Age, in which chaos and war was decimating city after city and innocence after innocence. So God said, enough, I'm going to send the light. And it was the first empire city state, most likely the first, if not, definitely one that Babylon called Eridu. Hebrews are calling Eden. This is a cultural reference to a empire that at one time was created in that cultural belief system. Moses is claiming that after God's mercy for the land established a man to rule over that land, and that his sons would continue to rule over that land in perpetuity, so that the land would remain out of chaos and in order. But they didn't live up to that. So through their descendancy, which came to Israel, Moses is saying Adam may have failed and did not live up to the call to bring order and justice to the land of Mesopotamia. So we have been given that task, and we are now the new Adam in the land, in which God is raising up to make us head over all of Mesopotamia. Why? To honor the oaths he gave to Adam, to create an oath with us, to bring order back to the land of Mesopotamia. They were to pick up Adam's mantle, being his son by descendancy, and continue that mandate through the land, with them being the head over all of Mesopotamia. One earth, one land, and one covenant to control it all. Lord of the Rings. No, but but that's the but that's the structure. And if you look into Lord of the Rings, they actually base it off the Bible. So we actually get that. It's a very understandable thing, and that's what's happening. The Tale of the Two Towers, Eden, and well, I won't go any more into that. But anyway, the reality, that's what was set up. And that's the reality of what was set up, according to the claim of Moses. Moses saying the historical prologue, the history of the Israel people that brought them into God's covenant, was God's great love for a land of people that he was bringing into a higher state of consciousness, introducing technologies to, and from that technology, all sorts of war came. So as a result, God's great love sent them a man to control those war nations. And that began the age of empires in the land of the Middle East. And God's chosen ones were supposed to keep order in the land for those people.
Right.
So I said a lot there. I've said it 3 times. So hopefully one of those times has resonated with you, been able to kind of hear what I'm putting forth. If you wouldn't mind, Mercy,
I have a lot.
does good. Okay, I won't set it up. Just whatever
Yeah.
you feel like you want to say.
Well, I think the setting of this time frame, if you look at, anthropology and archaeology, very critical. That you're talking about a time frame where there's, it's very savage, it's vicious. There are people that are coming in, and there are various tribes, and they're warring against each other. Why do we call Mesopotamia the cradle of life? Because it's now you're entering into a time frame where now things are being civilized. How are you being civilized? How do you create this function and order? And this is why I think Dr. John Walton explains it differently. I think when he first wrote his book and he was talking about, function, nobody understood it. And he said he changed that word to order. Now, I understand what he's saying in the Bible. But in a larger context at that time frame, why the Bible is so focused on function and order is because of the setting of what is happening here in Genesis. There's no way that you can gather a whole group of people speaking many different languages and gather them together and create a city state that's functioning. Now you're having government. Now you're having a temple system. Now you're having trade. Now you're having the arts. You're having this stuff that humanity didn't have before in this organized fashion. So that's why they're so focused on function and order, because you have to have that in order for anything to evolve. So we're entering, like you said, in a time of empire, but this is the kingdom age. That's why Jesus was talking about the king. And you have to have a good, righteous, peace prince king to rule that kingdom, right? So that's what Jesus is talking about. This is what Moses is talking about. They're coming out of a great kingdom of Egypt, but he's saying, but that's not what we want to copy. Remember the mandate that we have from Genesis 1:28, that we now can rule in a way that it's not exclusive. We think of Christianity as, well, they were chosen, so they were better, and the people that were in darkness, they were bad. No, being in darkness meant that they didn't have understanding. So, like God told Abraham, you're going to bless the nations. God brought light so he could bless the rest of the land of Mesopotamia, so that Adam could now come and bring in the other city state people and the other languages into this fold and the kingdom of light. That was the purpose, not to punish them or to hate on them. That was not it. And I have great sadness, Dallas, when I think of Genesis 1:28, because that one verse has been used. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Christianity, people have used that one verse and called it the dominion mandate. And they've used that to justify war, to justify the 9 crusades, okay, to justify these horrible acts all throughout Christendom, taking this one verse out of context, saying that we're special, we're chosen, so we have the right to do genocide. They're not even understanding what this verse is saying. It's actually saying the opposite. Because I have chosen you, Adam, and out of this place of darkness, I want you to be a light so you could bring them into the light. It was redemptive. It was always restorative. Now, whether they choose to do that or not, that's a whole nother topic. But the motive and the function and the purpose of God was to bring them in and to bring them into inclusive covenant relationship. That was the whole point, not to be exclusive. I just wanted to share that with your audience and with you because it just kept on popping up to my mind. You know what? Genesis 1:28 has been the verse, the banner of the dominion mandate, even manifest destiny in America, in North America, of why they were, justified going and taking all the land of the Native Americans was we have the right to rule and reign. It had nothing to do with that, but here we are again. Let's put it in context. It's in the land of Mesopotamia.
Well, you got me thinking, like, with your points there, we need to see how this is consistently the same image too, because like when we see in Genesis day 2, they were raised above. It literally says that. It says they were put above to rule with God. Day 6, they were given dominion. When we read in Deuteronomy 28, because we're kind of saying Moses wrote this,
Yeah.
right? Moses said this is what they went through. Well, this is what Moses said in Deuteronomy 28:13. It says, the Lord will make you, Israel, the head, and you only will be above, you will not be underneath if you listen to the commandments.
Hmm.
They would be above, they would rule. In fact, there's many actual scriptures that talk about, and I wanted to see if I have this one right in front of us.
Are you talking about
uh,
the scale contrast?
the authority, that
Mhm.
what this is talking about is the authority. And that's what's really important here, is what in Deuteronomy 28, Israel is coming out of Egypt. They haven't divided up into Israel and Judah. They haven't even gone into Canaan yet.
Mhm.
They just came out of Egypt. Who is Israel head over? This is Israel only doesn't have an answer for this because they don't get the context of what Moses is asserting in Genesis, which is a ruling party over the land of Mesopotamia. Who in Deuteronomy 28, Israel just came out of Egypt. There are 12 united tribes as one unit, and they were to be made the head. The head of what? The land of Mesopotamia. They inherited the exact same mandate that Adam had. And that's what Moses was claiming. He was claiming in Exodus 4:22, God's firstborn. Israel was God. They were inheriting what Adam started.
Mhm.
And we see that in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, Moses was still there. They weren't a failed nation yet. They weren't waiting to bless other. What were these other nations that they'd be head over? Mesopotamia. And this is what we need to see. This,
Yes, there was a
yeah.
body. Mesopotamia was there. God needed a ruling headship, an administrative body, bring them into the light. And Moses is claiming his or their legitimacy to take this place, this to take this position.
And we also see, and hopefully I can remember, it's in this, maybe I'll just Google it, because in the Psalm it said, uh,
You mean Psalms chapter 2?
Psalm where it talks about, um, and the dominion
Mm.
went out from Egypt in Israel. Spur of the moment, just looking up the scripture, Psalm 114. So let's quickly go there. That's one of everybody's favorite, right? And I do believe it's about verse 8. So we'll just quickly jump down to there.
think verse 2.
Is it 2? Are we? Yes, here we go. Psalm 114. When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Jacob, from a people of a strange language, Judah became his sanctuary, his temple, and Israel his dominion. Moses claimed the right to dominion by being Adam's descendant.
Yeah,
Why
without
did
have it, you don't have any legitimacy.
and why did Adam get the right to rule the land? because God loved Mesopotamia so much that his heart broke when he saw them in chaos at the gift of technology and expansion of the human consciousness. So he raised up a man to lead them into order because of that great love. But because of his inability being just a man, he failed, and that task passed through his descendants until it was reinstalled with Israel, who was given another chance to bring order to the land.
That was beautiful. Yes.
That's the context of Adam only. Because when Jesus came, he brought an end to the agreement that God started with Adam. That's why Adam was the first Adam and Jesus was the last Adam, because that's when it ended. There was no longer a need for an empire to rule the land of Mesopotamia.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll hand it over back to you there. There's nice little fun rants, but that's the context of Adam only.
Yes. And I think if we take that, the Bible is saying, and we're fleshing it out in the setting of when, where, how, what, who, it is specifically in the land of Mesopotamia. And when you were saying, for God so loved the land of Mesopotamia, it was reminding me of John 3:16. For God so loved the world. We know that the cosmos, the world that they were referring to, was that whole region. What was the remaining parts of Adam? We would say what the Roman Empire. Roman Empire took over that region. This is way before Rome ever comes. And so, for God so loved the world, meaning the cosmos of that ancient world, that he sent his son Jesus to the body of Adam, what? To save them, right? That's the context of John 3:16. And it goes all the way back here, all the way to Genesis. That's so important to keep in mind, folks. We talk about, full preterism talks about, audience relevance. And it's like, do you actually know who the audience is? I find it very comical because it's like, no, it's not the whole world. It's, you say that, that of, how everything ended with the covenantal system in the New Testament, but you're not quite understanding how it all began and how it all ties together, right? And that is the audience relevance. That's cultural relevance, that's historical relevance. All has to be the same consistency, and that is in the land of Mesopotamia. Now, throughout time, the name changes, the new headship changes, right? But it's that same covenantal story, the same people group, the same territory.
Exactly. And we actually see that described. We still got 7 minutes, so I'm going to throw this one more example in Genesis 2:7, when we see the second creation being described here. So it's the second take. We'll get into the discussion of the difference between Genesis 1 and 2 at another time. But verse 7, we see the creation event being the same context of Genesis day 1 here. And what's interesting is how they say, then the Lord God formed the man. So this is the word Adam, from the dust of the Adamah. So it's the exact same in the sense they're both Adam, but the ground is Adamah, which is the feminine, which is earth, ground, land, soil. Adam more directly translates into like clay, red clay. And that's why it's often referred to as ruddy or red hair, red skin. And these kind of ideas about who these people were is because of that association to the earth. When we read this, then it says straightforward that then the Lord God formed the man of the dust from the Adamah, from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living creature. So, where did Adam come from? The Lord God formed Adam of the dust from the ground, from the Adamah, from the earth, from the soil, from the land of Mesopotamia. God didn't form him from dust particles. God formed a people by gathering them together out of the people of Mesopotamia. So just like we read in day 1, God called a light out of the waters. In Genesis 2, God called a man out of the land of other people. They're telling the same story.
Mhm.
The land, what do we read in Genesis 2:6? There was no, let's quickly bring that up. It's the exact same story as Genesis 1, as we read in verse 4 or verse 5. When no bush was in the field, or I've got the SV, so it's going to read a little bit different probably than you King Jamers. And I think King James is very important for the Genesis 1 and 2, but the SV will work today. When no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not yet caused it to rain, and there was no man to work the ground. Well, that's exactly what we read in Genesis 1, which was what? There was no man in the land was void. And then what? And there was no plants. Plants came up on day 3 after the dry land was revealed. So, day 1, the earth was there, the land was there was no man in the land because there was a flood, there was a deep, there was chaos and war. But on day 3, after the wind blew all the water off and the land dried, then all the trees and the bushes came up. Well, this is saying before day 3, before all that vegetation came up, while there was no man in the land. Well, that's Genesis day 1. There was no man in the land. There was no vegetation in the land. There was none of that yet. Why? Because of the destruction. So, what did God do in verse 7 right after that? Verse 6, He waters the land. And then in verse 7, forms the man from the land. So in Genesis 1, same exact story. God comes in, the chaos is in the land, and out of that chaos, God picks one people to be the light. Genesis 2, there's no vegetation. The world is desolate. There's nothing going on. And out of those people, God forms one people. Same exact story. And where did he form them from? The land.
Of
The
Mesopotamia.
land of Mesopotamia.
Yes. And when we think about, just real quickly here, since you mentioned Genesis 2 7, the Bible is talking about Adam and Adamah, Adam as the masculine, Adamah as the feminine. And in that structure, it's just an archetype of how they thought back then. And that is the administrative leadership was always called the head, and the body was always what the supportive administrative people group, right? So you have again in Genesis 3 of Adam was the head, the administrative, but then you had Eve, which was that body. It had
which we actually see in Genesis, which we see in Genesis 2. Sorry to interrupt you. But if
okay.
we, what does Adam do? He is told to work the land. The very people he was taken out of. He is now responsible for making their land fruitful. So that's exactly what you were just saying. Now it's his job as the head over the body to ensure their fruitfulness, their productivity.
Yes. And it's more of the function. It's not about gender. It's not about man versus, female. Has nothing to do with that. I know that has come into a lot of church doctrine and whatnot, but it's just the way it was an archetypal way of how the ancients talked about how to bring order and function in a society to bring a civilized group of people together. But this is very special because Genesis is talking about a covenant people with Yahweh.
And we aren't actually any different today from that. That's where we got the term corporate body. We have a head of a company called the CEO who surrounds himself with a board of directors, and that's the head, that's the director. And underneath that is the body of all the employees have been incorporated into that one body. So that one body of employees sits underneath the head, the ruler. We don't actually have any problem with this as Bible readers because we accept it no problem in Colossians when it says, and Jesus is the head over his body, which is the church. Jesus is the prime, the principal one over top of the members. That's Adam. He was the head over top of the members. And what was his? Sorry?
Mhm. Which was Eve.
Well, no, his members. So you're going into a whole other topic, and we're
I'm
probably that's a whole other can of worms. But
sorry.
but in the context that we're talking about, Adam in Genesis 1, Moses is claiming was raised up as a people to rule over the land of Mesopotamia. So he was the head over the body of Mesopotamia, but they failed. And then that covenant access ran its course till it came to the people of Israel. And Moses claimed that God chose Israel to continue that dominion through. It started with Adam and it ends in Israel. And that's what we're getting around here when we're saying Adam only. We've had a bunch of conversations. We're hitting right up to an hour here, so it's nice. We're kind of resolving this at about an hour. But the questions have been, like, who are you talking about? So now I just want to throw this answer out here because a lot of are you a universalist? Does Adam only support universalism? Well, the problem is if you're going to ask me that, that means you don't understand the concept because being saved or having salvation is a Adam issue. If you were in salvation, that meant you weren't in life. That means you were in bad covenant standing. So if you were in life, you were in good covenant standing. Salvation came when the people had fallen into bad covenant standing under the curse, and God saved them from the curse of their inability to live up to the law and transfer them out of that death and curse back into that life and blessings. So salvation was a covenant responsibility of the vassal and the suzerain when they were working together or apart. It has nothing to do for people outside of that covenant, which then brings up the question, the whole point and purpose of our existence to the greatest degree is to bridge and be with that creator. Well, then if Adam only is saying that at the end that ended, then how do we come into God's presence now? Do we need Jesus? Do we need law? Do we need structure? Do we need Adam? The answer is no. God's character to love man is man's access to God. Jesus is the proof of that. Without Jesus, we're just making stuff up. But because Jesus fulfilled all those things required of the suzerain vassal contract and God honored his accomplishment, we know he's trustworthy. We know his words are true. And because of that, we now today, apart from law, apart from covenant, we can access God through his character. How? I believe his character is to accept me. Why? Because he showed me that in Jesus.
as
I don't, go ahead, sorry.
as an example.
And not also just as an example, but as a reality. Jesus' name was the name in which, so we started with Adam, but when Adam failed, who are they going to call on? They don't want to call on the God that crushed their ancestors. They want to call on the God who's reigning and ruling, which then passed. We actually see that immediately with Noah's child Shem, which was the God of Shem. So they were calling on the God of Shem to replace the God of Adam. But that changed again because the promise left Shem and went to Abraham. And now that was following the God of Abraham. And then it was his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob. So we praise the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then when Jesus came, it shifted again. So the name of Jesus will always be here. Why? It was the last name in which God gave man to access who is the creator. So the name Jesus will always be the last name. There's no need for another name. Why? Because he was God's example, as Mercy was saying. Example for what? That when I call on the name of the God of Jesus, that the same God that did what he did with Jesus will hear me. Jesus doesn't need to pay for my sins. Jesus doesn't need to make me come out from some position of inferiority. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not I trust in God and whether I'm being true. If I have some underhanded motive, if I have a motive I'm not even aware of, and I'm trying to get up and, in that sense of I'm upping myself, if I'm concerned with myself, God's not going to pay attention with that. That's the message of the Bible. If we want to live with ourselves as the primary factor to everything, God has no interest in that. That's not a relationship. That's a relationship of one, you and yourself. So it's that trueness. I need to truly just be interested in a relationship with God. That's all it is. It's not even that big of a deal. So I truly want to know you. How can I get to know you? Oh, your character to accept me. Well, how can I believe your character will? Well, remember this guy, Jesus. It's been 2,000 years, but you can still rely on the God of Jesus. So Adam only doesn't end with Jesus and the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story. Humanity's just beginning, folks. That's why Adam had to come. Adam had to come because we had to stop running around in caves with spears, trying to keep up with the flocks and herds during the spring and the summer, and transition into city states and become sedentary in order to grow, as Mercy outlined beautifully, into all these pottery, into art, into philosophy, into the growth of mankind had to come. But that was a time period. And during that time period, God testified many times to who he was. Now that that time period's over, God's character remains the same. That doesn't mean we are in the same situation as those who he had to speak to. And that's the difference with Adam only is we're not putting anyone back under law. We're not putting anyone back under covenant. That covenant was between God and Mesopotamia to bring order to the land. And in that, we see God's true character, which is the heart of the Father to love the weaker. And that's who we are. And that should be encouraging because that means God loves us. And how did God approach the weaker? Through mercy. That's God's heart and character. How do we know? Because of Jesus. So Adam only does not disparage Jesus. He does not get rid of Jesus. He does not say Jesus doesn't mean anything. But Jesus served his role, and we have to honor that, or we don't get what we were told. Mm-hmm. We are not to re engage under a set of laws that put us back into slavery. That's what the covenants were, slavery to Adam. That's why it ended. It ended for the sake of freedom. And so that's where we kind of break this down. So there's no such thing as universalism because that's talking about salvation issues of the Jews at the time of their day of wrath. Today we're in a different situation. Today the situation is I want to know God and I want to know how. How do I know God? By being true, by being of the trust of his character. That bridges the gap. Then it's whatever relationship you guys build. It will never disagree with the spirit behind Jesus. In fact, it will probably lead you down that road. But to all those people who have loved God in their hearts, regardless of the scenario and circumstances, who've never had the Bible, who've never had opportunity to hear Jesus, who could never even have known the covenant existed because they grew up in a place where this literally happened before them, during them, and even after them. They lived in a whole different continent that didn't have access to that. But God still met whoever was on that other continent when they were true and trusted in his character to meet with them. Why? Because it's not a covenant that makes God love you. It's God's character. So I don't want to ramble too much. I'm preaching now, but this is that we got to get past judgment. Covenant is judgment. It's determination of good or bad. That's not what we're here for. We're here for relationship. And that's what we should be asking. Do you or do you not have relationship with God? And what does that look like? That's what we need to start walking in is what are we actually doing with this? Or do we know him? Or do we just know stuff about him? So that's where we start bridging. That's where we are. That's the new age, if you want to call it that. We're past Adam, but that doesn't mean we're past God. That doesn't mean we no longer need his message. In fact, we probably need it more now than ever before. And every generation will probably say that because it will never cease its relevancy. There you go. There's my big speech, Mercy. I love giving it to you. It's 10 minutes after the hour, so I'll give it whatever you need to say. But This is where I'm at with it, and I can't see how it's wrong. And I'll open the door to anybody to come on and engage me and show me how I'm wrong, because I'm not really here to be right. I just want to be true.
Yeah, that was really beautiful, Dallas. And I think just with the whole concept of, covenant creation, looking at the Bible through a covenantal lens, I think it's really important to teach people the covenant language of the Bible. We're just getting closer to what the Bible is saying, folks. We're not trying to create something whole new. We're actually discovering and uncovering what's always been there, but we haven't been able to see it because of all the theology and the doctrines that's been in front of us. So all these concepts, I know it's very confusing, or very maybe distant for us, but people are, I think, ready to hear this. And this concept of this covenant language is going to be unfolded in the next videos to come. And we're going to address these issues as we come. We're just trying to lay down some of the foundational points there. So I hope you appreciate this video and everything that Dallas and I put into it. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, again, we were not really trying to create a new view. We're just trying to go as deep into the truth as we can. And as we've done that, we've come to realize that there's just not another view out there that holds this position. So as a result of that, we got to give it a name. If you don't like the name, you don't like the name. That's okay. I don't even really care about the name. The reality is, we're just trying to find some truth here. And if that resonates with you, if you like what this is going on, thank you for coming along on this journey. That's what this is about. I'm not saying I know it all. Mercy definitely does not try to pretend that she knows it all. But what we have found, we can't deny. And what we can't deny, no one can show us why we should change that view. So that's what this is really about, is this is what we found. What do you want to do about it? And that's where we are. So, and if I misspeak, Mercy, please correct me. And if anybody knows Mercy, she will. So,
Mercy.
Mercy me. Anyway, right on. I want to thank everybody for sticking it out. We went 10 minutes, a little past where we normally do. So hopefully this answers some of the questions, and also gone into more detail into not only what Adam only is, just a greater context in general of kind of what we're talking about. I appreciate the banter that goes on, and I look forward to some more comments. And yeah, new video coming out, just so you guys are aware, where I'm getting into what is Adam, and we're going to break that down. A lot of good response on the last video, breaking down just uh, these concepts, the Torah and the two kingdoms. If you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. A lot of good comments. Getting really good at clarifying these things. So I'm just like Mercy, getting excited to be able to say these things, see these things, and hopefully now, with this being able to actually clarify about what we're talking about, I think this conversation is about to get much bigger. So thank you for joining us on that. Wherever you are, I hope this finds you well. God bless.